Jerry. I work for the University of California, and some of you know me already, and I focus on nurseries and floriculture. But today I'm going to try and cover topics and issues that go across to other crops. So how many people here in the room grow avocados? Oh, many. So you're going to love the tensiometers. How many citrus? A few. Oh, a lot of trees, almost everybody. How many grow vegetables? Okay. Nurseries? Okay, okay. We have a good distribution. So this presentation is being recorded, which limits drastically my ability to say inappropriate jokes. I apologize for that. But on the bright side, you can go back and say it again. So I want to get started talking about nurseries containers. How many of you grow in containers? One. All right. So the first 30 minutes of the presentation will be focused only on you. And I have some toys there. I have a scale and I have a load cell. And later we play a game. I will have you weigh this container with your hands and this other one, and then put it on the scale and guess what's the weight. And who wins, who gets it right will win $1. So this is a way that you can use to measure how much water your plant in your container needs. And now I'm using those 6-inch containers that are known also as 1-gallon containers. And so this is a job that I did last summer. And what we wanted to do is to put these pots in the nursery, and then weigh them before irrigation, put them out there, run the sprinklers, irrigate, weigh them again. So by the difference, you get how much weight changed before and after irrigation. But we're playing this trick here that 1 milliliter of water weighs, how much does it weigh? Who knows?
1 gram.
1 gram, right? So by the change in weight, you can measure actually how much volume of water from that irrigation system, from that sprinkler system, all those drops of water fell into the pot and were intercepted by the pot. And in this case, we took the pot and we put it in a bucket, because in the bucket we wanted to collect the leachate. Who knows what's the leachate? Leachate? The water that comes out at the bottom of the pot, right? And why is that important? Why do we want to know how much water comes out at the bottom of the pot?
So that it weighs water adequately?
It's saturated.
That's right. Those are all true things. When all the substrate gets saturated, then some water will leach, and that water will bring some salts with it. So having leachate, having something that is called a leaching fraction, is very important for salt management, because otherwise you keep irrigating this plant and the water evaporates and the salts are left behind. And so then the salinity in your pot keeps growing, and at the end your plant will be hurt. That's true for trees too. So you will always have to apply some additional quantity of water than your plant needs in order to leach those salts. And this fraction is called leaching fraction. We'll talk about it later again. So we put this bucket, and then we put the pot inside the bucket, and we taped this skirt made with a plastic bag in order to avoid that some droplets of water would fall in between the bucket and in the gap between the bucket and the pot. And then we weighed the pots before and after irrigation, and then we also put empty pots just to see how much water the empty pot lined with another plastic bag would intercept without the plant. And then we put these things that are called rain gauges that allow us simply to measure how much water the irrigation system applied. Are there any questions about what we did? All right. So before I get to the data, I wanna take you back to 3rd grade and go through a little exercise. So say that tonight we get some rains, we get a tenth of an inch of rains, which is a reasonable rain that we may get. If you left a bucket outdoor and it intercepted 1 inch, a tenth of an inch of water, how can we calculate the volume of this water inside the bucket? We have a bucket, 12 inches of diameter. We have that water that is at the bottom of the bucket, and it has a depth of a tenth of an inch. How can we calculate that volume? Well, with the tape measure, we can get the height of this water, right? But now we want the volume. What's the volume of a cylinder?
I'd pour it into a measuring cup.
You could. That's a good idea.
R squared times the height.
Okay, that's very good. So we could calculate the area. The area is radius squared times pi, right? That gives us the area of that bucket. And then by the height, we get the volume. We get the volume of this little cylinder of water, right? So the diameter is 6 inches. 6 times 6, 36. 36 by pi is 314, more or less 100, right? More or less 100 times 0.1, 10, right? About 10. Who's confused? Who's asleep? All right, so what did I do? Okay, here's the calculation. It's about 11-inch cube, and then you can convert it to ounces or milliliter or gallons, right? But let's say that instead we are in a sprinkler system. So instead of being rain, it's dripping, it's droplets from the irrigation system, from the sprinkler system, and they fall into these 6-inch containers. It's the same tenth of an inch, but instead of falling into this bucket, it falls into these 6-inch containers. So now let's do the calculations again. So we get the diameter is a little less than 6, which corresponds to 142 milliliters. The radius is 71. Let me see if I can move this thing around. Can I move this thing around? Yeah. So then this time I did it in milliliters, right? So the reason why I'm boring you with this stuff is that I want you to, for at least once, to have seen it, how you calculate this. If you're there dying to know how much water fell into your pot, into your container, at least once you know, you have seen how to do it. So you calculate the area starting from the radius, and then you multiply by the height of that water. Any questions? So either everybody understands or nobody, or everybody's asleep.
Question.
Yes.
Why can't you just pour it into a measuring cup?
Well, because in this case you can't, right? When you're, so the bucket is just an example, but
you're not talking about the leaching.
No, I'm talking about you irrigate with your sprinklers, and you have all your pots or your 1-gallon pots in your nursery, right? And you're there scratching your head and say, okay, how many milliliters of water, how many ounces of water did each of my pots receive today, right? I ran my irrigation system for 30 minutes. I know that I applied a tenth of an inch. I applied a tenth of an inch because I have my rain gauge, and after the irrigation, there was a tenth of an inch in my rain gauge, right? How much water did my 1-gallon containers receive? And now you cannot pour it out because it's all in the substrate, right? One thing that you could do is wait before and wait after irrigation, and that's what we did here. I apologize for the busy slide, but this is the weight. The blue is the weight of the leachate container. Before irrigation, average 317, and after, average 317. So there was no leachate in this case. They didn't apply any leachate. The pot with the plant at the beginning was 1056 grams, and it went up to 1125. So it increased by 70 grams. And the pot without the plant increased by 59 grams. And by doing the calculation as we did earlier, we got 55 grams. So we're pretty close. This argues that the presence of the plant increases how much water the container is intercepting, which is known as the capture factor. And then we took the pot and we let it dry for almost 1 month, and we weighed again, and it weighed 358 grams. Then we irrigated as much as we could to get it really wet. We let it drain, and we weighed again, and it weighed 1528. I mean, this is a big difference, right? So the quantity of water that container can hold, since one is completely dry and the plant is wilted, to when is completely, it's not saturated, but it's at capacity, it's at full capacity, is almost 1200 grams, which is a lot of water. And in terms of percentage, is 59% of the container. A soil that holds a lot of water maybe holds 50%, but that's a clay, right? A loam maybe holds 25% of water. So 60% of water is a ton of water, and this happens only in this, organic substrate that we use in containers. Then you can get one of your irrigators and tell them, well, okay, every day I want you to weigh this pot, take it from the irrigation system so it doesn't receive any water, and weigh it every day. And you will get numbers like this. And if you plot it, you will get something like this. And then you can irrigate that pot as much as you can before it starts leaching. And then you wait, and you will get this upper limit, this 1500. And so now you know what's your upper limit and what's your lower limit, right? Because you don't want to get your plant wilted. And what you really do, you will keep it always up at the upper limit, which in 1 gallon container seems to be about 1500 grams. And that's when you will generate some leachate. The other thing that you can do is to wait continuously with this thing that is called a load cell. It's like a scale, but instead of having a display, it sends some data inside that white box there, and where there's a data logger that collects the data, and then you can plot the data and does something like this. So this is the weight of that pot up there. So, and this is when we irrigated, and you can see that every time that we irrigate, we have an increase in weight. Does it make sense? Who wants to tell me what are these periods where the weight doesn't change, where the weight is flat? And who wants to tell me what this period is where the weight decreases?
It's drying out.
When does it dry? When is that the plant uses water? Daytime. When is that it doesn't use water? Nighttime. So this, when it's flat, it's nighttime, and during the day the plant uses water. And this thing is so sensitive that you see this wiggle here. It's the wind. So that thing even picks up the wind on that pot. But with a graph like this, then you would know everything, right? Then you would know that your upper limit is up here at 1500. You want to be there. You want to get to 1500, and then the plant uses the water, and then you irrigate again by the same quantity, right? But you don't need just knowing what this graph looks like. It gives you a lot of information only if you get 3 points. If you ask your irrigator to take 10 pots in your nurseries, weigh them all, take the average, and then you will know before and after irrigation where you stand. And if they had done this, they would have known that they were on the dry side, right? Because they were at 650, and at the end of irrigation, they were at 800. And instead, they should have been up here at that 1500 that we said is the capacity, more or less, of your 1 gallon pot. And it's something super easy to measure just with a scale. Any questions? All right, now let's get into irrigation a little bit more. This is a table that I did, that I made just to make your life a little easier if you don't want to go through math. So you say, okay, I have a 6-gallon container, the radius is 3, the area is 28, 46 grams is how much the pot increases in weight every time that I apply 0.1 inch. And so you can say, well, okay, say that I want to apply 150 grams. How many inches of water should I apply? If each 1/10 of an inch increases it by about 50 grams, how many 1/10 of an inch do I need if I want to increase it by 150? About 3/10. So about a third of an inch of water. And then if your irrigation system delivers a third of an inch per hour, which is a reasonable number, how long would you irrigate? About 1 hour. So who knows what do you call this quantity, this inch per hour that is delivered by irrigation system? Who grows avocados here? All right. Do you know if you run your irrigation system for 1 hour, how many inches of water your irrigation system delivers to your crop? You don't. Well, if you don't,
Depends on the head of the sprinkler.
that's right. If you have drippers or if you have sprinklers, depends on that. And to know that, so this quantity is called the application rate. The application rate. Again, it tells you how many inches per hour your irrigation system delivers to your crop. The application rate, the depth of water applied per hour. And is determined by the flow rate of each sprinkler head. Who knows the flow rate of their sprinkler heads? How much is it?
It's 14.5 per hour, 14.5 gallons.
14.5 gallons per hour. Yeah, okay, good. Who else knows it? What is it?
Double head, 10.5, 20 gallons per hour.
20 gallons per hour. Okay. So on sprinklers, you can look it up. And this is the 2045 PJ. That is a common sprinkler head is Rainbird. And you can look it up in this table. You can look it up in this table that you get on the website of the manufacturer. And they tell you, okay, if your nozzle size is 1/8, at this pressure, at 55 psi, you will be applying 4 gallons per minute. So you know that each of your sprinkler heads puts out 4 gallons per minute. And then you have to divide by the area that each sprinklers covers. And if you're ever confused on this, please talk to me. And this is a table that tells you, well, if your sprinklers are 30 by 30 or 15 by 15, how it's common in nurseries, and the sprinkler head puts out 4 gallons a minute, then you will get 0.5 inch applied in 1 hour. If your pattern is square, if your pattern is triangle, is different. And you can also go on the website of the manufacturer, and sometimes they tell you these are the Hunter PGP Ultra. They tell you here the 4 gallons per minute nozzle will put out about 1/2 inch per hour. This is a Rainbird sprinkler, puts out 2 inches per hour. But notice the difference, right? Between 2 inches per hour and 1/2 inch per hour is a big difference. So if you run it 30 minutes, in one case, you apply 1/4 inch. In the other case, you apply more than 1 inch. So there's a big difference. There's a big range. And so the best thing to do is just buy a rain gauge and measure it. You can measure it by yourself with the rain gauge if you're irrigating with sprinklers. Any questions? Okay. Can you use evapotranspiration? What is it? What is evapotranspiration? Enrico?
It's the amount of water that a plant transpires.
That's right. It's kind of the opposite of rains, right? Rains is how many inches of water fall from the sky. And evapotranspiration is how many inches of water plants or surfaces or the soil evaporates, right? So you can go on CIMIS. Who knows what CIMIS is? California Irrigation Management Information System. It's a website made by the government that you can go on and you can download this table, and it tells you this ETO, it's called reference evapotranspiration. Then it's more complicated, there is coefficients and stuff, but it kind of gives you an idea of how much water your plants used yesterday, your avocados used yesterday. So if you go here, you see that yesterday, on October 22nd, we used 0.12 inches of water, right? Then you have to divide that by the distribution uniformity of irrigation system, and you get 0.16. So if yesterday your plants used 0.12 inches, today you should irrigate 0.16 inches. And again, how many hours do you have to run it if your application rate is 1/3 of an inch? Your application rate is 1/3 of an inch, and you have to apply 0.16 inches. About 30 minutes, right? Who's confused? Who's asleep? Who doesn't give a damn? All right. All right. That makes the two of us. Leaching fraction. So the leaching fraction tells you what's the fraction of water that you applied, that drained. So if you applied 1 gallon and the 1/4 gallon drained out, only 3/4 of a gallon stayed in the pot or stayed in the root zone of your avocados, then your leaching fraction would be 1/4, like 25%. And you should, in theory, you can get you can measure the electrical conductivity of your irrigation water. In this case was 1.8. And typically depends if it comes from the Colorado River or if it comes from the Delta. It will be better or worse quality, but typically we're about 1 here in San Diego. So you can go on this table and they tell you, well, if your water electrical conductivity is 1.8, then we're looking at this row. And then your leaching fraction will be 0.28. Let's pick this 0.28. In general, it should be between 0.2, 0.25. 0.3 is a large leaching fraction, but 0 is too small, and 0.7 is too high. And in this case, we just put a pan underneath this pot, and we collected it, and then we measured how much water we were applying. In this case, it was 0.8, like it was crazy high. And some other cases is 0. So if you pick up a leaching fraction of 0.28 and your plant needs 46 grams, what you have to do is divide 46 divided by 1 minus the leaching fraction. And this will give you 64 grams. So you apply 64 grams of water, 46 is what the plant uses, and 18 grams is what leaches at the bottom. And I bet you $1 that if you do 18 divided 64, you get 0.28. Who wants to do it? Nobody wants $1? All right, I'll keep the $1. Now I'm running out of time. Nursery container, it's very easy to weigh them and you get a lot of information. You can also use evapotranspiration. Be careful with the leaching fraction. This is a graph that I made using that machine. And here's the plant using water, and you can even see night and day, night and day, night and day when the plant uses water. And this one I irrigated, and you see this blip here is when the water drains out at the bottom of the container. So you can use that also to estimate your leaching fraction. I have YouTube videos for those of you that are dying to learn more about these issues. And now that you're completely asleep, I'm going to give you 1 minute to stand up and wake up. I hope there is enough for everybody, and if there isn't, you can share.
Yeah.
All right, how many of you have used tensiometers before? How many of you love them? How many of you hate them? Nobody hates them? Seriously? All right.
That was really expensive.
Yeah, they became more expensive. I mean, they're a super simple. They're a super simple instrument. And here I happen to have a picture. My friend Michael Kahn, he works in the Salinas Valley, and he has a blog. He's a colleague of mine, and he has this do-it-yourself tensiometer. And if you Google do-it-yourself tensiometer in Salinas Valley agriculture, you will find it. And it's a post where he teaches you how to make one out of PVC. And it's is relatively cheaper. You still have to buy the gauge and the porous cup, but it takes a lot of labor. So, but it's cheaper than buying them from Irrometer. You can buy from Irrometer, or you can buy them from Soil Moisture. In this presentation, there's a lot of information out there about tensiometers, and I've tried to give you the information that is lacking out there. And so the first thing I want to do is show this YouTube video where I make a fool of myself explaining how tensiometers work. So bear with me.
Hello, this is Jerry Spinelli with the University of California Cooperative Extension. Today, I want to talk about this thing. Some of you know it, some of you hate it, some of you have never seen it. This is a thing called a tensiometer. Basically, it's a tube of acrylic plastic with a vacuum gauge, and we'll see what that means in a minute. And you just fill it with water, and there is a porous cup. It's ceramic, and it means that it has little holes. It's kind of a spongy thing. It's hard, but it's a spongy thing. And that was interface with the soil. The soil is dry. It will draw water from here, and so it will create a vacuum inside the pipe, and the gauge will measure it. If the soil is wetter, it doesn't suck as much. It always sucks, right? And unless it's completely saturated, the soil always sucks some, and that suction is measured by the gauge. So the more vacuum the gauge measures, the drier the soil is. Now, this is going to sound a little funny, but I'm going to demonstrate how this gauge works. And if you, like me, learn experientially, you can read a million times on a book. You can read that it's a vacuum gauge measures vacuum, but unless and until you have experienced yourself with your senses, you won't really trust it. You won't really learn it. So when I used to deploy these in the field, and sometimes the gauge fades. So the way I convinced myself, the way I tested whether the gauge worked or not, was just by sticking this thing in my mouth and sucking on it. And so you'll see that the needle moves. And if the needle moves,
done this
then you know
before?
the gauge works. And you also kind of understand how this instrument works. So here we go. Don't do this at home. I'm going to try to show you how this works.
Nobody's
All
done
right,
this
look at the
before?
needle here.
Now,
I hope you can see the needle.
I'm crazy about that.
Did you see that it went up
Same
to
moves.
20 centibars? I'm gonna show you it again. Ready? I'm just sucking. I'm just putting my mouth on this reservoir here and sucking on it. So let me try again.
You see it moved?
Yeah.
All right. So I got
Yeah,
it to
quite
30
right.
this time. Then we have a contest, and whoever gets it to 50 wins. Okay. So now that we complete.
Question.
They have a pump that does.
They have a pump that does that, but you don't want to, when you're servicing like 50 of these in one entire days, you don't want to, you know. But the gauges go bad all the time, you know. And that's, I don't know if you're that kind of person that wants to make sure with your senses that something works and how it works and how hard you have to suck for that thing to move. But you know, so don't do it. But if you want to do it,
Ourselves.
I'm not responsible.
What it does, at least I'm convinced. Now, the other thing that I want to show you is that when we remove this cap, then we let air in, and so the needle falls to zero, just like you saw it.
Try and do
It's
it.
down here to zero.
So you have your tensiometer,
First thing you want to do before you deploy
whatever it gives you now.
is you put this cap, you screw
Look
it
at
in,
the
make
needle.
sure that this rubber stopper here makes the seal there with that hole. Now,
Did it go to zero?
The whole
So now seal it again.
area is sealed from the atmosphere. And now
Seal it again and wait, keep it vertical until you see that it creeps up again.
And basically I'm mimicking what the soil would do, just by putting this around this porous cup and then drying it.
Who didn't get the
And if the
tensiometer?
instrument works, you see that within minutes,
You want to share it with your
you can see this
colleague?
needle here.
Want to show what's going
Within
on?
minutes, it's gonna start developing, some vacuum is gonna develop inside the instrument, and the gauge
Is it
is
creeping
gonna
up again?
respond by measuring that vacuum. Now I'm gonna speed up this sequence to make it more dramatic, but you see that it's grown already, right? It's at about 10 now. It was at 0 a minute ago.
Who knew this already? How many knew this already? How many are confused? All right. How many thinks this is great?
Okay, so now the
All right.
needle
Okay.
went up to
At least
20,
one.
right? So now we're convinced that this thing works, that is correctly measuring how dry, in this case, this tissue is, right? But if you leave it there, just sitting there, of course, vertically, and the air is so dry that it will dry it out, and it will go up to 50 or 60, right? Sometimes if you have a leak, you will see tiny little bubbles appearing here, and that means that you have a leak in these threads, and you will see a string of bubbles that go up to this reservoir.
Who has seen this? Who has seen the string of
that go up
bubbles?
from here? So that's how you learn that an instrument does not
Is there a
work.
mathematical formula to
And now-
measure the humidity in the air with
You
this?
would be ready, now you convinced yourself that this instrument.
can't
works,
measure
right?
that
The
high, that
gauge
dry.
measures the vacuum, and that the instrument.
It's in the
actually
hundreds of bar. This
develops
measures
vacuum
until 1
inside,
bar.
And the gauge measures it. And so now you would be ready to stick it in the soil. But before we do that, I want to show you what happens to this tension that now it's up to 24. While I was talking, it went up by another 4 centibars. I want to show you what happens if I remove the cap.
I'm gonna
Coming
skip.
down.
Yes, you've done it already, this, right? Of opening it, see that the tension.
Now that I maintain these things to convince myself that they were really working, I go there and the needle says 30. So is it stuck there? Is it really working? So I would go there and undo the cap, and as I remove it, the needle falls down to 30. It falls down to 0.
So you should
30
do
to
this. When you
0.
go there and it says 40, is it 40 for real? Is the gauge bad? How do I convince myself? You undo the cap and you see that it falls down to 0. Then you put it again and you see that it goes back up to 40. So now you convinced yourself that indeed it was measuring 40.
Is that if you go to the field and it says 0,
Does it make
for 2
sense?
reasons.
Yeah.
Either the soil is completely wet and you just irrigate it, and so the soil is so wet that there is no tension in the soil. So the soil needs to be saturated to be 0. Yeah.
What if you go there and it says 0? What does that mean? Either it's completely wet, but it must be like saturated wet. It's really hard to get this thing to measure 0. It has to be like flooded. What's the other option? That is, it's dry. Exactly. The vacuum broke, and that happens often. And that's because these instruments measure wetness on the very wet range. That's why they're used a lot in vegetables and in strawberries that are very wet crops. On trees, on avocados, we can use them, but you need to keep in mind that you're measuring on the wet side of things. So either you put them really close to the root ball, or you put them deep where the fluctuations are less and the soil remain wet longer. But it will happen to you that you go there and it says 0 and resist the urge of saying, it's 0, it's super wet, I'm fine, I'm gonna go to the bar and have a beer. It may be that is, instead of being completely wet, it's completely dry and it has lost vacuum. Who's confused about this? Okay.
I had a question.
Yes.
I thought the tensiometers, when you read their stuff, they want you to put this near the drip line.
Yes.
Keep it out from the rip ball.
Well, there is different placement strategies in different crops. And now I'm going to refer you to a video from my colleague Gary Bender that speaks specifically about that. How deep you want to put them in avocados, how close to the root zone you want to put them in avocado. I'm gonna show you the link to the YouTube video in a minute. But in general, you want to be measuring if it gets too dry and it loses vacuum, probably you want to get closer to the drip line or deeper where it's wetter. Okay, we're done with this video. We're done with this video. The other question is, how long does it take for the tensiometer from when I irrigate to equilibrate? If I irrigated 30 minutes ago, is my tensiometer already telling me the truth, or it still has to equilibrate? And so here's another video where I put two tensiometers in two pots. Now internet is slow. You see, and I start irrigating, and you see the needles start going down. Can you see it? Hope you can see it. Let me start over. You see it was up at 50. And 10 minutes later, it was already 20 minutes later, 30 minutes later, it was at 10. About 1 hour later, it was at 5. You see, when I say it's really hard to get them to measure 0, even if you completely flooded that soil, it's unlikely that we'll say 0. This is another video, the last one, when I do the same thing, and I had these sunflowers that were super wilty, and so as they get irrigated, they start covering the camera, which is kind of funny. But you see, it was at 70, it was at 80 here. It was at 80, and I apologize, the timestamp is upside down, but it started at 10. It started at 10. You see, it started at 10:30. And by the time we're at noon, it's still there at 30. So be careful when you irrigate. If you go there after 1 hour, it may be too early. The needle is still moving. You see, it started from 80 at 10:30, and at noon it was still at 40 at 30, and now it's coming down. At 1 p.m. it was at 10. So you probably want to wait a couple of hours before you read your tensiometers. And thanks to Gary Woodling for donating this, so we can use them for educational purposes. Are there any questions about all this? No questions? All right. Why do we like tensiometers? We like tensiometers because they measure tension. What is tension? Who wants to tell me what tension is? Why tensiometer? Measure tension. What's tension?
How hard it is to get the water out of the soil.
Yeah, that's a good way. Some people call it suction, right? It's like a sponge. If you have some water on a table, you put the sponge. You see that the water travels towards the sponge because that sponge is sucking that water into the sponge. And the soil does the same. The soil has some suction. Unless it's completely saturated and so the suction is 0, the soil will always have some suction.
So is that the roots doing the sucking?
Pardon?
Is that the roots doing the sucking?
The root is there in the soil where the soil is sucking, and what happens is that the atmosphere sucks on the leaf harder, and so it pulls all this water through the plant, and so the root has this ability to suck this water out of the soil until there is enough water. And what this graph says is that as you remove, this is how much water is in the soil in terms of percentage. 50% of water in the soil, 40% of water in the soil, meaning if I have a gallon of soil and I have half a gallon of water in that soil, I would be here. If I have a tenth of a gallon of water in that gallon of soil, then I would be here. So the more I remove that water, the more the tension increases. The tension goes up. And the tension goes up, and this is 1 bar. So this is how much my tensiometer would measure until 100 centibars or kilopascal, which is the same. So my tensiometer can only measure in this range, and that's why I said it's a wet range. But the good thing is that a plant will feel and will yield and will produce at 1 bar the same, regardless of the kind of soil that the plant is living in. That's why we like tension, because it's very related to the physiology of the plant. And look how variable is this. At 1 bar, in a sand, you may have less than a 10% of water, and in a loam, you may have about 25% of water, and in a clay, you may have maybe 40% of water. So you guys may have different kind of soils, but if you use tensiometers, that measures what the response of your plant is. So we kind of cancel out with tensiometers. We cancel out the effect of the soil. Does it make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Question? And of course, we measure something that is the larger it is, the drier it is, right? So it's the opposite of moisture. It's not, if I have a lot of tension, it means that I have less water. So the more the needle goes up, the drier it is, the drier your soil is. Questions? Okay. So again, we cannot measure above 100 centibars. We cannot measure above 100 kilopascal, which is the same. Why some people don't like tensiometers? Because they only measure on a very wet side of the range, and you have to maintain them. You cannot throw them in there and go back after a year and expect them to be still working. They won't. You have to go there with that water and refill them, and that gauge will go bad. That gauge will go bad, and you'll have to change it. And they only work on soil. They make some different model for organic substrate, but they don't work on substrate very well. Okay, so this is some data from tensiometers in strawberries that I collected a couple of years ago, and we had 5 of them at different depths, at 6 inches and at 12 inches. And we collected data continuously. So you can buy, instead of having a gauge, the gauge is really nice because you can look at it, right? But you can put a pressure transducer and then connect it to a data logger and collect data every minute. So you will get graphs like this. And this graph shows you how big is the variability both day to day and within the day, right? So this is night when it goes down, and this is the day when it goes up again. And then it goes down at night again, and it goes up again. And then check out this day. We didn't irrigate this day, and so look at the green one. It went up here. This line is noon. So here we're about 3 p.m., 2 p.m. It went up to 18 centibars. But if I had walked to the field at noon, I would have seen 10 centibars. I would have said I'm fine. But check out, within 2 hours, it went up here. And then at night, it went down again to 13 bars. And then look at the next day. It went up so high that it's out of the graph. So again, if I had looked at it at noon, here, I was at 25 bars, but then within a couple of hours, it went up there to 50 maybe. And luckily the irrigator this day irrigated, and so you see that all the lines go down again. But I guess what I'm trying to stress here is that you have a diurnal pattern always. And so it matters a lot at what time of the day you look at your instruments. There will be a huge variability if you look at them at 8 in the morning or if you look at them at 2 p.m. And again, the peak is typically afternoon, in the early afternoon. So I encourage you, if you want to look at them only at one time of the day, it should be early afternoon. And then the solid line, there's there's tensiometers at 6 inches, and the dotted line are tensiometers at 12 inches, so they're deeper. And as you can tell, the fluctuations are less dramatic, and also the soil is wetter. So again, if you go deeper, probably the conditions will be wetter, and your tensiometers will not lose vacuum. Any questions about this graph? Does it make sense? Are you still playing with your tensiometers? Not anymore? All right. So yeah, again, you have a diurnal pattern. And sometimes you will see graphs where they, instead of tension, they call it soil water potential. And so they flip it upside down and they put it negative. So now this is drier and this is wetter. This is dry and this is wetter. So sometimes you will see graphs like that. But either way, the diurnal pattern will be very pronounced. So again, in the early afternoon is when the tension is the highest. And here I have the videos as promised, so you can get your phones out and scan this code, and you will get my colleague Gary Bender that teaches you how to install avocados, how to install tensiometers on avocados. So if you get your cell phones out, you can scan that code up there. And I promise that you will get the video if you're interested.
Yeah.
What time of day were they irrigating on this particular pattern?
You know, I don't know. This is some data that I found somewhere. These, in my data, were typically irrigating during the morning. And so, but in that particular day, it was early afternoon. So you see that it goes up again, and the irrigator irrigates it, and it falls down again. You got the video? Are there any questions? All right. So some other resources that I have here is a booklet for vegetables. There aren't a lot of people here that grow vegetables, but they teach you how to make a hole with a soil probe, pour some slurry. You always want to make some slurry with your soil, some chocolate milkshake looking slurry, and then pour it in the hole, because that slurry is what makes a seal between the porous cup and the soil. You always need that. Otherwise, you will have this hole and you will have some empty space between your porous cup and the hole, and there will be no interface, and your instrument will not be measuring. Well, it will still be measuring something, so you will be deceived because you will see numbers, but there will not be good numbers. So don't forget to make that slurry, and it just takes water and soil, and you mix it together. And then they give you also all these range for various vegetables. I'm gonna take questions now. We have 5 minutes left. Please complete this survey. I have another code there. This is very important for reporting issues. How many of you like to pay state taxes? Nobody? Really? Just me? All right. So the government asks you to pay taxes, and then they do things with that money that is truly in a truly unscrutable way. But one of the things that they do, they pay folks like me to do what I do, believe it or not. And so they want to make sure that you get what you paid for. And so this is what this survey is for. So again, if you want to scan this code with your phone and say, well, Jerry was terrible, or Jerry was really helpful, or we don't like his accent, or whatever you want to say. He wasn't very useful, but he's very well dressed, so we'll forgive him. Yeah, so please scan that code and complete the survey. And other than that, I have 5 minutes for questions. We can still play with the tensiometers. We can still play with the other toys. Yes.
So using this device is not very practical for a pot nursery. I mean, if you're testing, right, it has to stay in one location for a certain amount of time.
Yes, but it equilibrates with the soil pretty fast. They also make, I think that they make one with some handles that you can install it there and leave it there and then measure it and then move it around. So
Okay,
it's not terrible to move it around.
But
Maybe
is it practical? I mean,
it's
okay,
practical.
this is the situation.
Yeah.
The people that have watering are not experienced enough. And so could they use that? Okay, this crop, put it in, oh yes, this needs to be watered. This crop over here.
They could. The problem with the tensiometers is that these particular ones do not measure very well in substrate. They're made for the soil. There is some that are shorter, smaller, they're called MLT, and they're made, MLT, Irrometer makes them. They're small, and the cup is blue instead of being white, and they measure on an even weather range. I think they go up to 40 centibars, and those you can use in pots. But if I were you, I would just buy a scale, and I would refer you to the first half of the presentation, because it's just a lot easier, and you can tell. I don't know. I mean, try this.
Yeah, but
Weigh this and weigh this, and I mean, the difference is really striking.
But if your yards are all over the place, you know, taking this equipment to each yard, each time you water.
You can take a scale, you can move the scale around, and the irrigator, before irrigating, they can like take 5 or 10 pots from the block and weigh them all and write them on a clipboard and then report them to you. And so then you can say, okay, this block is drier, that block is wetter. It takes a lot of labor, takes some labor. It's not super labor intensive. Or you can move to these things that are more expensive, but they save you labor. And then you get all the data in your office, on your cell phone, and life is beautiful, and birds are chirping, and the rainbow is there. And talk to me if maybe you can borrow one and you can work together. I have a couple in my office. More questions? So, okay, careful. I'm gonna start asking questions here.
So I got a question.
Yeah, okay.
So you got an avocado tree
Yeah,
and you irrigate it down to less than 10
less than 10 centibars.
on your meter.
Yeah.
And then when would you want to apply water again? At 20, 30, 40, 50?
How do you know? Yeah.
Well, that's a question that we have to ask Gary Bender.
Where's Gary at?
I think in the video he says it.
Oh, okay.
I think in the video he says it. I don't know if I remember. Here it is. Let's watch this video. How much time we have? 2 more minutes. Let's watch the video.
Forget expensive solar panels.
God,
Get
solar panels. Give me a break. Give me a break.
We're going to install a tensiometer right near the root ball of our young trees to measure the soil moisture.
So it says
The
near
tensiometer
root
was
ball.
invented back in the early 1950s, and it's been around a long time.
Remember earlier somebody told me you don't have to put it in near the root ball, you have to put it next to the drip line, but he
When
says,
they're young, you want them near the root ball.
okay. So
Growers
maybe
still
that's what
use
it
them and they
is.
still work pretty good if you maintain them. And let me tell you about the tensiometer just a little bit. This has a porous clay cup right here, and this allows water to move back and forth inside the tube here. The tube is filled with water and it's blocked with a cork right here. I'll show you the cork. Right here. Now, if the cork wears out, the tensiometer will fail. So these usually need to be changed about once a year. Put that back in. Now, what we do to prepare the tensiometer, we fill this with water and we put it in a bucket of water overnight. And then we put a vacuum pump on the top here in the morning. And we pull a vacuum while it's still in the water. And little air bubbles will come out of that porous clay cup, and you keep pulling the vacuum until all the air bubbles disappear. And then you know you have a solid water system through the whole tensiometer. Put the cap back on, tighten it down. Now, as the roots try to draw water from the soil, they also tend to draw water through this porous clay cup. It pulls the water column down and turns the dial. 0 is usually about 0 to 5 is usually saturated soil. And in our decomposed granite soils here in Valley Center on the hillsides, we usually water at about when the needle reaches 20 to 25. And that's usually about 30% moisture loss in the soil. And that's when we'll turn the irrigation on and replace the water. Now I'm going to show you a secret how to install this. First of all, we use a soil tube to dig the hole. We go about 8 to 10 inches. In this case, we were about 10 inches, I think, and pull the tube out. If you don't have one of these, you can use a 3/4 inch pipe and just pound it into the soil and pull it out, or any kind of a probe will work just fine.
The problem with that it will compact the soil.
Probe will, yeah.
That's right. So no, to pound a 3/4 rebar into the soil, it will compact the soil at the bottom, right, and on the sides too.
Copper tubing works fine.
Yeah. So that's right, the copper tubing. Yeah. So
don't use a big shovel or something to disturb a lot of soil. You want to make the smallest hole possible. Now these do fracture if they hit a rock, so be careful you don't jam it down into a rock. And here's the secret to installing this and makes them work really well. Pour some water into the hole. This is called mudding in. We're going to mud this into the hole. You can see the water come out like that, all the way down. And we will just kind of push the soil up against it, make a nice tight seal.
I would still
And right
recommend
now,
to
we
make a
see it
slurry.
right next to the root
Take some of that soil, make a slurry.
ball. As the tree grows, we will gradually move this out away from the tree a little bit to measure the proper amount of moisture. I usually tell growers to, as a standard, put a shovel handle's length away from the trunk and a shovel handle's length away from the sprinkler. That's usually about the right spot. Okay, that's the conclusion of this one. And later on, we'll show you how to install some other moisture meter devices in the soil.
All right, this is the end of the video. It's 4:05, so I want to send you home. I'm here if there are more questions, and thank you for your attentions and for your questions. And yeah, and here's my code to the survey again, in case you got the phone. Well, you can also write down all this long link in a piece of paper, and then you can type it at home in your browser. It was a joke. You don't have to do that. You're fine. So thank you again, and have a wonderful day. And I'm here if there are more questions. And thank you to the Farm Bureau. Thank you for the Farm Bureau. Thank you all. Thank you, Tasha.